In spite of everything, I still believe that people are truly good at heart. This is probably the most famous line from the Diary of Anne Frank. Her story is well known, and I'm not giving anything away when I say that she was a precocious German Jewish girl who had lived in the Netherlands since the age of 4, a teen who idolized Hollywood's film stars of the 1940s, an aspiring writer, a kid who loved her cat, but also a child who was forced to hide with her family from Nazi persecution in a secret annex in the center of Amsterdam for 2 years. The annex, or het achterhuis in Dutch, was, as many of you might already know, an inconspicuous cramped space in the back of the second floor of Anne's father's pectin factory that Anne shared with her family and several other people, at least one of whom was a complete stranger. And the space was accessible only via a turning bookcase. The diary, a gift she received for her 13th birthday, just weeks before the family went into hiding, was Anne's first serious attempt at becoming a writer. The published version is famously a narrative of her life in the annex, yet it is also one of war. Anne chronicled day-to-day events, and some were even normal for any teen, sharing meals with family, a budding romance, puberty, quarrels with parents, a Hanukkah celebration, learning Latin, excitement about new shoes. Yet she also vividly described fights among annex residents who were fed up with their claustrophobic living quarters, an alarming robbery in the factory, the comforting sounds of nearby church bells that made her feel connected to the outside world, the relief of breathing fresh air through the attic window, visits from helpers who not only supplied food, but also the much-needed companionship, explosions in the neighborhood, the rumbling of fighter jets exploring the skies over Amsterdam, and, very often, the paralyzing fear of being discovered. I am not the first, and I will certainly not be the last, to say that Anne has become the one child to symbolize the plight of all Holocaust victims, and that her words I quoted at the start of this talk have become a profound source of inspiration for post-war populations around the world. These words are also printed in a program booklet for tonight's performance. At face value, to believe in the goodness of people despite being persecuted sounds inspirational, and perhaps Anne's statement helps to cushion the painful sting we feel in the aftermath of such tragic horrors. And yet, as Darrell Horn argues in her book entitled People Love Dead Jews, Reports from a Haunted Present, generations after the Holocaust have latched onto this by and large feel-good statement in order to escape dealing with the true heaviness of the tragedy. Idealizing small elements about the stories of dead Jews like Anne, Horn explains, allow us to focus on something positive rather than on the incomprehensible tragedy of a murdered Jewish child. Indeed, as Horn says, films and plays that have addressed Anne's story have primarily focused on the interactions within the annex, her Jewish identity, the many reasons for why she was there at all, what was happening to other Jews in Europe, or what happens to Anne after the family was discovered, are often secondary in these tellings of her story. But Horn reminds us that these are the most important parts to discover. Anne's legacy is not one of inspiration, but one of profound sadness, of trauma, of persecution, and of death. After being locked in her prison-like hiding space for 2 years, fearful and deprived of any of the comforts we take for granted, she was murdered in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp at just 15 years old. In the opera that you will see tonight, composer Shulamit Ran and librettist Charles Kondek reflect on Anne Frank's life in hiding through a musical telling of her story as related to experience of the Holocaust's other victims who suffered outside of the boundaries of the annex walls. By seamlessly weaving together different temporal and spatial realities of Anne's experiences and of the larger Holocaust, Ran and Kondek present a new take on how Anne is remembered, while also reminding the audience that her story is not just a single tragedy, but one of the 6 million Jewish Holocaust experiences. In the roughly 30 minutes that I have with you, I will introduce the composer and librettist, take you through the structure of the opera, and explain how it relates to the diary, illuminate how Ran and Kondek accomplished their goals musically, and finally contextualize some of the musical elements in the opera, among other Holocaust themes compositions. Shulamit Ran, who will be in attendance for the premiere tonight, is an Israeli-American composer born in Tel Aviv in 1949 to German and Russian Jewish parents. As a young child in Israel, she studied piano as well as music composition. After she came to the United States to complete her music education, Ran became one of the most successful contemporary female composers. Indeed, in 1991, she was only the second woman in history to win a Pulitzer Prize for music, which was followed by numerous other awards and professional engagements. Much of her music focuses on Jewish themes, such as the 1985 Psalm Adonai Malach or the 1969 Hatzvi Israel Eulogy, a chamber work for mezzo-soprano, flute, harp, and string quartet. And some of her compositions also center the Holocaust, including, of course, tonight's opera Anne Frank, but also her string quartet number 3, titled Glitter, Shards, Doom, Memory, that she composed in 2013. This piece commemorates Holocaust victims, and it is based in part on the work of Jewish artist Felix Nussbaum, who perished in one of the concentration camps. This quartet was performed by the Pacifica Quartet at IU last month, as part of the many events surrounding tonight's performance of the opera. American librettist and translator Charles Kondak is most known for his work on Hugo Weisgall's opera Esther and Shulamit Ran's other opera titled Between Two Worlds. Some of his work has earned top recognition, such as the Mark Blichstein Memorial Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Ran and Kondak's two-act opera is broadly based on Anne Frank's diary. Each act features several numbers that correspond to events in the diary, but with a few exceptions, the libretto does not quote Anne's words directly. Nor does the opera present a chronological sequence of events from the diary. Rather, the opera is loosely based on events and themes that Anne wrote about, while also exploring what was happening outside of the annex. The first act, which is the longest with 23 numbers, begins in an unidentified concentration camp, visibly marked with barbed wire, where several prisoners introduce themselves, including Anne and members of her family. The scene then shifts to a few months before the Frank family went into hiding, until the audience is gradually transported to the annex. There we learn about the family's experiences in hiding, but some of the concentration camp prisoners we met at the beginning remain visibly and audibly present throughout the story. We witness the annex residents experience moments of sadness and intense fear, but the highlight is an extensive festive Hanukkah celebration that concludes the act. In the second act, which is decidedly shorter with just 13 numbers, we see Anne maturing emotionally and falling in love. But we also witness the annex residents' increasing anxiety about the war, their hope for liberation as the Allied forces make their way to the Netherlands, and eventually their emotional exit from the annex. In the final number, titled Shoah, the Hebrew word for catastrophe that is used primarily by Jews in lieu of the term Holocaust, the opera ends where it began. The family joins the concentration camp prisoners who accompanied the story throughout. At the very end, we can no longer see Anne among all the other prisoners. She has died, or rather, she was murdered in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Several musical moments stand out where Ran attempts to reflect both the life of the annex residents and everyday existence in concentration camps at the same time. I want to draw your attention to a couple of those that I think are most poignant, so that you can look out for them as you are watching the opera. In the instrumental opening of the first act, you will hear the sound of several trains approaching an unidentified concentration camp. As soon as the train has arrived, the passengers, who are now prisoners, announce their name, their occupation, and the city where they are from. Anne and Margot emerge from the crowd of prisoners, but after we learn Margot's name, the scene immediately shifts to Anne's 13th birthday party in Amsterdam, an event that happened more than 2 years prior. As both time and space transition to the past, we see some of the prisoners working in the camp, while others move back in time with Anne to become party attendees. They all sing an upbeat birthday song as Anne receives a pile of gifts from her friends and family. The seamless transition between the present and the past, and between starkly contrasting spaces, sets up the premise for the entire opera. The main characters exist in one reality, while the concentration camp prisoners live in another. Ran often musically connects the two realms together by allowing the prisoners to sing with the main characters, even when they remain within their distinct worlds. For the audience, it has an interesting effect because while you are watching Anne Frank's story unfolding, you are never allowed to forget, both visually and orally, that the Holocaust is happening outside of the annex. As you will soon see, the set designs assist in the seemingly effortless blending between the annex world and the one in the concentration camp. As some of you may know, the MAX stage is rather large because it is a replica of the stage at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. While a large space like that is not typically ideal to convey the peculiar atmosphere of a tiny, stuffy annex, this production took advantage of the size of the stage. The librettist indicates in the score that prisoners must always be visible, even if a particular scene focuses on just the annex residents. By creating a small annex stage in the middle of the stage and leaving space for the concentration camp set on the sides, the set's creators, expertly led by set designer Mark F. Smith, could both underscore the small size of the annex while keeping the audience informed of what happened in the camps at the same time. One of the most important moments in the opera is the extensive Hanukkah scene at the end of the first act. And this is a great example for how the composer and librettist utilize shifts in time and space in this opera. As you may know, the Hebrew word Hanukkah translates to dedication in English, and it is probably the most recognizable Jewish holiday among non-Jews. The holiday commemorates a group of Jewish warriors called the Maccabees, who successfully stood up against oppressive Seleucid armies in order to liberate and rededicate the first temple in Jerusalem. To show appreciation to God for this momentous victory, the group prayed for 8 days, and each night they lit one candle of the Chanukiah, or the Hanukkah menorah. The part of the holiday that people are most familiar with is that the Maccabees only had enough oil for one night, but somehow they managed to make it last for 8. For this reason, traditional Hanukkah foods are very oily. You might be familiar with the potato pancakes called latkes, or the type of jelly-filled donuts known as sufganiyot. During the Hanukkah scene in the opera, the prisoners in the camps as well as the annex residents celebrate the holidays simultaneously, but independently within their respective worlds. The holiday commences in the annex with the Hebrew prayer and candle lighting, and the prisoners' chorus then repeats the prayer. Ran first introduces a setting of the traditional Hanukkah song Maoz Tzur, or Rock of Ages, sung in Hebrew. Let's listen to the melody of a traditional setting of the song. Keep your ears out for a version of this melody in the Hanukkah scene. Following the Maoz Tzur, we will hear a Hanukkah song that Ran newly composed for this opera. This exciting and harmonically rich piece is once again initiated by the annex residents, but the prisoners join on and off in this festive song. It is sung both in Hebrew and in English. The English sections are about the excitement that Hanukkah brings and reflects on the beauty of the light that comes from the candles in the menorah. The parts in Hebrew repeat the Hanukkah prayer from the beginning of the scene when the celebration began. The jubilant mood in this moment of the opera could easily make the audience forget that the characters are in fact persecuted in that moment. But Ran does not allow us to forget. She reminds us that the genocide is ongoing with a few musical hints. For example, throughout the song, you will hear Nazi guards interrupt the celebration with a drinking song, to underscore that both the annex residents and the prisoners in the camp are still all in grave danger. Finally, and perhaps most poignantly, as the guards drunkenly contemplate the quality of Dutch beer, you will also hear Anne's famous words, "I still believe that people are truly good at heart," with a disjunct vocal melody. Juxtaposing Anne's famous words with lines uttered by Holocaust perpetrators is significant. Not only does Ran not use Anne's words as an inspirational gimmick, it is almost used mockingly. Of course, these guards are not good people. It is not surprising that the Hanukkah celebration occupies such a central space in this opera. The symbolism of this holiday is particularly important because Hanukkah signifies a historically successful Jewish revolt against their oppressors. Hanukkah was celebrated wherever possible and in whatever capacity it was safe to do so in the camps and ghettos, often with makeshift menorahs. I want to read a brief excerpt written by a Łódź ghetto resident that illustrates the significance of Hanukkah during this time. In the ghetto, Hanukkah is a family holiday as it was before the war. It doesn't require any formal setting. The Jew who wants to respect the memory of the Maccabees in a traditional way observes the festival in his own home. In the street, by a broken door on filthy stairs, a figure sits wrapped in rags. This figure offers candles. Usually these are Shabbat candles, sold each week on Shabbat Eve. This time they are candles for the Hanukkah menorah. Not everyone can afford to give the menorah its full radiance. Nevertheless, despite the hardships of this place and the lack of funds, this year too we will celebrate Hanukkah with dignity. The menorah candles go out, darkness prevails once more. We go out into the street, ghetto life starts again. In the opera, Ran also quickly reminds the audience that darkness of the annex life starts again for Anne and the others. The celebration is suspended when the annex residents hear a suspicious sound and fear that it might be the Gestapo who has come to take them away. As they are huddled together, they will be very quiet until you only hear the church bells that Ran describes in the score as, quote, ominous and sounding louder than any time before, which likely foreshadows what we know is to come next. A meaningful musical expression of the Jewish religion can be heard in the setting of the Shema prayer throughout the opera. The Shema is the most important declaration of the Jewish faith. Observant Jews recite this prayer twice a day, and it is also typically recited just before death. The text reads, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and it means, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. This prayer also acquires significant meaning during the Holocaust because, as several testimonial accounts from survivors reflect, the Shema was often recited in the camps as prisoners made their way to the gas chamber. Because of the religious significance of the Shema, as well as the additional meaning it gained during the Holocaust, many post-war musical Holocaust commemorations feature a setting of the Shema. For example, in Austrian-American Jewish composer Arnold Schoenberg's 1947 cantata A Survivor from Warsaw, a piece that narrates events in the camps with a libretto that is based on survivor testimonies, we hear the Shema sung by a group of prisoners on their way to the gas chamber. In Ron's version tonight, you will hear the Shema primarily as part of the prisoner's chorus, demonstrating the historical significance of the Shema in the camps, while underscoring the chilling fact that 6 million Jews found their death in the gas chambers. This evening's musical telling of Anne Frank's story is a Jewish story. The opera inspires audiences to think about how many other people perished in the Holocaust, how many other Annes died and are not remembered. By presenting Anne's life as it was, an episode in a genocide, rather than a source of inspiration, Anne's belief that people are good at heart become, as Dara Horn says, incomplete. There is no happy ending.